Oh, I love some. Thank you. Straight. Thanks. Good morning, and welcome to the Joint Economic Committee's hearing on job vacancies in the labor market. I want to especially welcome from the Senate side our ranking member, Senator Heinrich, as well as other members of the committee who expressed interest in exploring this important topic. On the surface, low unemployment and a large number of vacancies suggest that the labor market is tightening. However, wage growth has been slow, and many potential workers remain on the sidelines. Something is not yet right with the U.S. labor market. I've heard from many employers in Ohio and around the country that they are still struggling to fill good-paying job vacancies. These employers tell me about people not being able to pass a drug test, people not having the skill set to qualify for job openings. I believe there are causes on the demand side as well as the supply side of the labor market, and among both are economic policies by the last administration that weakened the recovery of business investment, labor productivity, and work incentives after the last recession. Business investment and productivity must rise faster for wages to rise faster, and more people must join the workforce to raise economic growth. The U.S. population is still growing. Since just prior to the last recession, the population has increased by 22 million people of working age. Yet, the labor force has increased by only 6 million people. The baby boom generation is moving into retirement, but people in their prime working years also are participating less in the labor force than before the recession. In addition to the work Congress and the administration are doing to reform taxes, improve regulation, and alleviate unnecessary government mandates, we must also focus our attention on improving the institutions that prepare our workforce for new challenges. That's why I've invited expert witnesses to this hearing who can provide perspectives from the economists, the educators, the employers' point of view. We must explore the value to the economy and individuals of sending ever more people to college, how well high schools position graduates for the workplace, how employer requirements inform the educational system, and what employers are contributing to the skill development of current and prospective employees. In the United States, we must find better ways to equip young people and workers of all ages with marketable skills and the ability to adapt to the changing market demands as they progress through their careers. I look forward to learning from the insights of our expert panels today and how to improve worker proficiency, flexibility, and motivation. Faster economic growth and rising living standards for American families will result from getting this policy right. With that, I now yield to our ranking member Heinrich for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Tiberi, and I want to thank our panel for joining us here today. The employment picture is certainly brighter than it was 8 years ago, but not as bright as this country wants or needs. Too many Americans still can't find a job or are in jobs that pay wages too low to achieve financial security. Employers complain that they can't find candidates with the right skills to grow their business. And in some parts of the country, for example, many rural areas, have largely been left out and need basic investment. Today, we're focusing on one way to create opportunities for more Americans, namely by investing in education and training options. Some industries in some regions of the country face a mismatch between the skills employers need and the skills that workers have. Addressing this is important, but that alone won't adequately improve the economy or strengthen financial security for families and for communities. To do that, Congress must work with state and local leaders to take an all-of-the-above approach that supports workers and businesses. In the 21st century economy, college is increasingly important for financial security. Congress has a significant role to play in making sure that students are not priced out of the future that they want and are ready to work for. Access to an affordable college degree must be available to every student who desires it. We also know that a college degree is not and should not be the only path to a bright future. Career and technical education, apprenticeships, and other training programs lead to good-paying jobs. Here, community colleges have a critical role to play because they understand the needs of local employers, are committed to creating opportunities for their students, and can design programs and courses that are responsive to employers' current and future needs. Tech Hire Albuquerque launched earlier this year in New Mexico. Using a federal grant program, Central New Mexico Community College partnered with employers and state agencies to create an IT pipeline by providing training, work experience, and job placement. Graduates learn new computer skills, coding skills, earn industry-recognized credentials, and are able to put those skills to use with area employers. Employers are able to fill open positions with candidates that they know have proven skills, and that's the type of innovation and creative problem-solving Congress should be promoting. It's also critical that we target training at high-growth sectors of our economy. That's what Central New Mexico Community College has done with its Stimulus Center, offering coding boot camps and new classes in Java, Android, and Salesforce. This week, Senator Gardner of Colorado and I introduced the Chance in Tech Act, which encourages educators and businesses to start apprenticeship programs for the tech sector. This will connect more Americans to a growing sector where jobs are opening up each and every day. In an all-of-the-above approach, we must recognize that investing in the workforce starts well before college, or even high school for that matter. It starts by investing in proven programs that set children up for success later in life. This is why access to universal pre-K is so important and why I'm a strong advocate of the two-generation approach, which provides quality early education for children while at the same time providing workforce training for those children's parents. We've seen this work in New Mexico. The United Way's Early Learning Center in Santa Fe offers year-round, full-day services for children alongside technology, employment, and social service assistance for their parents. For workers to remain competitive in the future economy, learning and skills development must continue over the course of a lifetime. Companies must get back in the business of investing in their workers, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the prosperous thing to do for the business and for workers alike. There's much work for us to do here. For the nation to be competitive in the future economy, we're going to have to find some new solutions, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses with their ideas. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to now introduce our expert panel of witnesses. First, Ms. Diana Furchtgott-Roth is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and the director of the Economics 21 program, recently served on the transition team for President Donald Trump. She served as chief economist of the Department of Labor from 2003 to 2005. Before that, she served in multiple roles for the George W. Bush, George H. Bush, and Ronald Reagan administrations. She holds a BA in economics from Swarthmore College and a master's of philosophy and economics from Oxford University. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Dr. David Harrison is the 5th president of Columbus State Community College. In his role, he initiated innovative projects such as the Preferred Pathway Program, which guarantees Columbus State graduates entry into Ohio's superb universities, including our alma mater, The Ohio State University. He also led the formation of the Central Ohio Compact, a regional strategy among K-12 and higher education leaders to help more students succeed in college and in the workplace. Under Dr. Harrison's leadership, Columbus State has received multiple distinctions for its innovative efforts. Dr. Harrison, thank you for being here, and as you know, I have a special place in my heart for Columbus State. So I took real estate classes there, and my 2 sisters went there. Scot McLemore leads the development and execution of talent acquisition and deployment strategies at Honda North America. He has spent 27 years at Honda in both engineering and human resource positions with a focus on technical development. In true American fashion, he started as a manufacturing engineer in the welding department of the Marysville auto plant, which is just outside my district. He currently serves as the co-chair of the Ohio Manufacturing Careers Council Image Committee, vice chairman of the Columbus City Schools STEM Industry Council, and is a member of several career and technical center advisory committees. Thank you for testifying today, Mr. McLemore. And last but not least, Dr. Betsey Stevenson. She's an associate professor with the University of Michigan, Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, and also with its Department of Economics. We Buckeyes promise not to hold that against you. Before that, she was a member of the President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. She also served as the chief economist of the Department of Labor from 2010 to 2011. Dr. Stevenson specializes in topics such as the impact of public policy on the labor market, women's experiences in the labor market, and the economic forces shaping the modern family. Dr. Stevenson, thank you for being here today. I know you just got here, so thank you for coming from the airport directly. We'll begin with our panelists from my far left. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Here we go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Ranking Member Heinrich. It's such a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, members, for coming to hear the testimony. As you heard, there's a big problem with job vacancies, with a mismatch between employers who want to find people to work, and yet we also have people sitting on the sidelines. I'd like to just briefly, in my oral testimony, review 5 points: community colleges, streamlining benefits, removing of constraints to economic growth, such as what the Federal Reserve is doing, tax policy, and regulatory policy. I know that Dr. Harrison is going to talk about community colleges, but I at least want to mention their very important role, how they can increase the earnings power and upward mobility of their students. I performed research using individual students in the state of Florida in 2009, showing that C students with a C average, performed much better when they went to community colleges and took a high return degree. They were earning about $45,000 a year when they graduated, much more than if these students, C students who went to try to get a 4-year degree right away, although community colleges are also a transfer point for people who want to get a 4-year degree. And these results have been extended and confirmed by a study published by the Community College Research Center of Columbia University. To maximize students' opportunities, the American Association of Community Colleges has implemented a Pathways project in 30 colleges to guide students towards high-return professions where they can get good jobs afterwards, steering them into degrees such as computer science and healthcare services. We call these high return because there are high-paying jobs waiting for them when they graduate. So this is a very, very important component. It's also, moving on to my next point about benefits, it's really interesting to compare the United States and the United Kingdom, which since 2000 have seen an increasing divergence in their labor force participation rate. It used to be in 2000 that the United States had a higher labor force participation rate than Britain. Now Britain has a higher labor force participation rate and a higher employment rate than the United States. What's been happening is that the United States, here we have been raising our benefits, expanding eligibility for disability insurance, for food stamps, for other kinds of programs, and the United Kingdom has been reducing its its eligibility, and they have been steering people into work as a condition of continuing to get benefits. So in the United Kingdom, if you're offered a job, you have to take that job. And that way, more and more people are returning to the workforce, and the number of people on benefits has been declining. In 2016, 3.7 million people in the United Kingdom were on out-of-work benefits, compared to 5 million in 2011. In contrast, in the United States, about 60% of non-working men are on federal disability benefits. So we might want to take a look at what the United Kingdom is doing. What we are also interested in doing is expanding constraints on growth, reducing constraints on growth. If we look at tax policy, regulatory policy, they are providing constraints on growth here in the United States. Our corporate tax rate is way above those in OECD countries. It's 39%, compared with 25% on average for OECD countries. Canada to the north has a 15% rate. There is nothing, I think, in terms of the one single thing we could do to increase economic growth. It would be lowering the corporate tax rate and moving to a territorial system rather than a worldwide system, which would stop companies inverting and moving off to Canada and other countries such as Ireland. So I would say that would be the most important thing that we could do. We also need to have regulatory reform, put in place cost-benefit analysis for regulations, and make sure that these regulations have benefits that justify the costs. Right in the EPA's environmental impact analysis and their regulatory impact analysis for their carbon rule, they admitted that jobs were going to be lost because of these regulations, falling primarily on states such as Ohio. And we need to make sure that these benefits also are, there's good benefits, and also that the costs are not geographically concentrated in certain high energy states. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Dr. Harrison, recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Tiberi, Ranking Member Heinrich, Vice Chair Lee, members of the Joint Economic Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today on this important topic. My name is David Harrison. I'm president of Columbus State Community College, and we happen to be one of the 30 colleges nationally that are part of the American Association of Community Colleges Pathways cohort that my colleague just mentioned. I'm pleased to be with you today to discuss the leadership role that community colleges can play in addressing the job vacancies for employers and in providing people with pathways to successful careers. The gap between open jobs and qualified employees is widening, and the reasons are many. The nation's workforce is becoming more diverse. We've overemphasized the bachelor's degree as the only path to success for young people, and our educational system has been slow to respond. You may be surprised to learn about today's college student. 3/4 of them commute to class while balancing jobs and family responsibilities. They're first-generation college students, adults in transition, and military veterans returning home. These are the students that are the solution to the vacancy problem, and we need to think differently about how to help them succeed. By overemphasizing the bachelor's degree, we've not served many young people well, as more than half reach the age of 25 without a post-secondary credential or an employable skill set. A technical credential is a better option for many of these students. Harvard University notes that jobs requiring an associate degree are growing at 3 times the rate as those requiring a bachelor's degree. Only 1/3 of new jobs will require a bachelor's degree, with the rest requiring an associate degree or technical certificate. Filling these 6 million jobs is possible with the right combination of strategies, including elevating the associate degree to prepare more people for high-demand jobs and expanding regional public-private partnerships between K-12, community colleges, and employers. I'm pleased to share with you today promising practices we've developed in Central Ohio, built on a strong culture of public-private partnerships. American Electric Power funds a program at Columbus State called Credits Count that enables us to prepare students for technical careers starting in middle school and take college courses while they're still in high school, leading to a technical credential. J.P. Morgan Chase selected Columbus State as one of 9 international partners to implement their New Skills at Work initiative, creating grade 9 to 14 career pathways for students in Central Ohio. and we've partnered with Honda of America to develop a talent pipeline of electromechanical engineering graduates to address an urgent need. You'll hear more about this from our great partner, Scot McLemore, whose testimony follows mine. But we won't fill these 6 million jobs by focusing on young people alone. Demographics are not on our side. Many regions of the country, including Ohio, are projecting decreases in public elementary and secondary school enrollment. We must have policies that help military veterans and others in transition, as well as initiatives to address employment barriers due to transportation, child care, and other factors. Employers who adopt fully inclusive employment practices are emerging as clear winners. Here again, public-private partnerships in Central Ohio are producing results. The Ohio insurance industry partnered with several colleges, including Columbus State, to develop an educational pathway that mirrors the professional career path in the industry, with a specific focus on adult students. This effort has helped Nationwide Insurance hire more than 1,000 Armed Forces veterans, with the goal of hiring 1,000 more. The federal government can support these regional efforts in 3 key ways. First, expand programs that are working. The National Science Foundation's Advanced Technological Education Program is an important source of venture capital for community colleges to develop programs in partnership with employers. At Columbus State, our NSF grants are focused in advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, data analytics, and logistics technology, all high-growth fields requiring specialized skills. Second, support programs that help adults in transition. The bill proposed by Senators Portman and Kane to expand Pell Grant eligibility to cover high-quality, short-term job training for low-income students could go a long way to help adult students prepare for the high-performance workplace. And finally, look to community colleges as the regional leader in convening effective partnerships with employers and other local groups to fill jobs, launch careers, and expand economic growth. Community colleges are purpose-built to address this workforce issue. Most of us are already doing this work, and we stand ready to do more. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. McLemore, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiberi, Ranking Member Heinrich, and the members of the committee for hosting this hearing on the critical issue of workforce participation and workforce development. My name is Scot McLemore, and I serve as the manager of talent acquisition at Honda North America. In my role at Honda, I work to develop strategies to help address workforce challenges. Honda has more than 70 facilities in the United States, including 12 manufacturing plants that produce a wide range of products, including cars, trucks, light business jets, power equipment, and power sports products. More than 73% of Honda's 30,000 U.S. associates work in manufacturing roles. In addition to our direct employment, Honda works with more than 600 U.S. suppliers who employ tens of thousands of workers nationwide. Manufacturing jobs are high-paying jobs with good benefits, which should be highly attractive in our current economic climate. However, today, our ability to recruit and hire a qualified, sustainable workforce is limited by 2 key factors. 1, a shortage of young people interested in entering manufacturing, and 2, a lack of perspective of employees who have the essential skills needed to be successful in a manufacturing job. Modern manufacturing equipment and processes involve an integration of pneumatic, hydraulic, mechanical, and computer network components. Too often, individuals do not possess the problem-solving ability, technical training, computer knowledge, or math skills needed to compete in the 21st century workforce. In order to address these problems, Honda has developed a number of education and workforce training programs which aim to build enthusiasm for future careers in manufacturing and provide potential employees with the necessary skills to compete in the modern manufacturing economy. Many of our programs are designed as public-private partnerships, including partnerships with academic institutions, local governments, and community organizations. While I will talk briefly about some of our programs, more information about them can be found in my written testimony. Honda believes that the first step in developing a technical workforce is to create excitement for manufacturing jobs through early engagement with students, parents, and educators. Beginning with middle school, Honda has partnered with several organizations to develop initiatives aimed at building interest in manufacturing and developing the critical thinking skills that are necessary to succeed in manufacturing. These initiatives include a unique educational video game for classroom use, mobile manufacturing labs featuring robotics, and STEM-based summer programs. However, a bridge must be formed between creating interest in manufacturing and actually preparing individuals to have the analytical and technical skills to operate equipment found on today's manufacturing floor. As such, we work with high schools and community colleges to develop curriculum, supplement classroom lessons with plant visits, provide mentorships and scholarships. Most importantly, we have established programs with community colleges that provide students with the opportunity to learn the technical skills necessary for a manufacturing career while simultaneously receiving their degree. An example of this is a partnership we have with Columbus State Community College, which is designed so students can work at Honda 3 days a week and go to school 2 days a week. This program gives students the chance to build technical skills while earning their degrees, allowing students a way to graduate debt-free. Upon graduation, students may be offered a full-time position with the company. We have similar internship efforts in other states and communities where we have manufacturing operations in the United States. Because the technology in the automotive industry is constantly changing, we make a commitment to ensure that the education does not stop once associates are hired. Honda remains committed to ensuring our existing workforce has the skills necessary to be part of our exciting future. To that end, we have established technical training centers near some of our manufacturing plants to help our associates stay current with technology and grow professionally. Going forward, we strongly believe that Honda's future and the future of manufacturing in the United States rests in the hands of programs like the ones I have outlined. However, there must be a significant increase in expansion of these collaborative efforts to develop a 21st century workforce. Additionally, continued support and improved access for STEM education is critical to ensuring that our future workforce have the skills to compete in modern manufacturing. One step Congress can take immediately is to reauthorize the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, which recently passed the House of Representatives. The current version of the bill will help encourage more collaboration between stakeholders to ensure students have a pathway to a relevant and meaningful technical career. Honda stands ready to work with Congress to help solve the critical workforce issues that stifle the full economic potential of our country. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Stevenson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiberi, Ranking Member Henry. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you for the invitation to testify today about the state of the market, of the job market. I want to start by placing the record number of job openings in the context of a strengthening labor market and an increase in dynamism. Businesses have continued to hire in large numbers, just again this June surpassing expectation. And over the past 6 years, we've seen the longest, most persistent streak of job growth on record. All this growth is leading to more openings, and perhaps more importantly, it's also leading workers to quit their jobs. And you might think that doesn't sound like a good thing, but it's actually a great thing when workers feel confident enough to leave their jobs in order to seek out better opportunities. In fact, job changes are essential for workers to climb the ladder to better and higher paying opportunities, and a return to a healthy level of churn is incredibly important, and frankly, we're not quite there yet. One of the most profound challenges our labor market faces is lackluster wage growth, so I want to spend most of my time talking about that. Wages provide a clear market-based signal of demand for skills, and one of the clearest signals is the high wages of college-educated workers compared to those with less education. That's not to downplay other forms of training, but I think it's essential to start there by understanding that the earnings gap between college graduates and those without has grown steadily for decades, and in the recent years has been at an all-time high. The benefits of a four-year degree are also seen in a substantially lower unemployment rates and higher labor force participation rates, even compared to people with a two-year degree. In addition, while there is concern about student loans, very clear research shows that student loans that have had the biggest increase in student loan defaults are associated with the rise in the number of borrowers at for-profit schools and other two-year institutions associated with weak employment outcomes. These findings underscore the importance of funding successful community college programs that are clearly linked to employment outcomes. One of the largest challenges the labor force faces in developing the skills of workers is ensuring that students from across the income spectrum have access to successfully and affordably complete a four-year degree, because that is where the strongest demand is still being seen. In competitive markets, a skills shortage should lead businesses to pay higher wages. And yet researchers have consistently failed to find evidence of employers bidding up wages of workers in areas even when there's a big gap between the number of openings and the number of hires. And that represents a real puzzle. I think the biggest place we see this is in healthcare, where there's a lot of openings, not a lot of hires, but the wages aren't picking up. Many economists have pointed to slowing productivity growth as one of the sources of slow wage growth, but it's important to recognize that even if we were to solve that problem, in recent decades there's been a disconnect between productivity growth and wage growth that we need to address. Ways that, some of the things that we're seeing is a decline in unionization, reduced worker bargaining power, and reduced worker mobility, and an increase in businesses engaging in clear anti-competitive labor market policies, including forbidding the sharing of pay information and requiring non-compete clauses, policies that are designed to restrict the ability of workers to make those changes that allow them to bid up their wages as they become more productive. Congress should seek to make the labor market as fair as possible by penalizing businesses that engage in such anti-competitive practices. Additionally, policies like updated overtime regulations, robust minimum wage, enforcing workplace protections are all key areas that are important to raise wages. And let me be clear, the current pace of job growth is unsustainable unless more workers elect to join the labor force, and without higher wages, that is very unlikely to happen. So let me conclude by saying that there is something else policymakers can do beyond training, which is provide stronger infrastructure to support jobs. Today's workers, particularly lower wage workers, face challenges in getting to work without adequate public transportation, face challenges finding care for their children without adequate, affordable child care, and too often lose their jobs or are forced to quit when they need time off to care for a sick family member or their own illness. Better infrastructure in the form of affordable child care, paid family leave, and better public transportation to support work would clearly help attract more men and women to the labor force. Research has shown clearly that policies would boost women's labor force participation. Additionally, recent research has shown that roughly half of the drop in male labor force participation is due to men cycling in and out of the labor force. So making it easier for men and women to consistently hold on to a job will boost labor supply. And let me simply end by taking a moment to note some cultural changes that are going on with our labor market, because I know this committee is particularly interested in that. Many of our declining sectors are in traditionally male occupations, while traditionally female or more gender mixed occupations are growing. These changes are going to require that we not only provide training for workers to successfully enter new occupations, but that we might rethink how we provide that training and how we conceive those jobs so that there's greater diversity for men and women to enter the jobs that are going to offer them the highest pay, regardless of their cultural connotations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your very well thought out testimony. Dr. Harrison and Mr. McLemore, last month this committee held a hearing on the opioid crisis. And our state of Ohio, New Mexico are two states that have been hit hard by that crisis. One of the things that I hear from employers in Central Ohio regarding that is that they have job openings, but folks can't pass a drug test. So anything you can share with us on your experiences with respect to that, and are there approaches that we can take to address such a problem?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a very important question and concern, I think, for employers across the U.S., including manufacturing, obviously. While Honda, based on my experience, we've seen some impact to the opioid abuse situation, but compared to other employers within the state and across the U.S., it hasn't had a very big impact currently. I guess in thinking about that situation, though, my concern is also with those that are not yet employed. So, which we don't know the full impact of that, meaning the youth of America. So when thinking about that question, one of the things that I want to be aware of and take back to Honda and working with our partners is understanding that situation and maybe incorporating those concepts with soft skill training as we go out to the high schools and middle schools and making sure that young people are aware of the impact of drug abuse and how that could negatively impact their career. But currently, we're not seeing as much of an impact as some other employers.
Dr. Harrison?
At the college, we know that that our student body reflects the overall population, and we are in the early stages of trying to build this in as a career readiness component of our work, so that students really are understanding what's going to be expected in the workforce. It's interesting, the conversations that I've had with employers, because they're struggling with it and are addressing it in different ways. So recently I was in a conversation with two different CEOs. One was talking about the fact that they were working so hard to find new people, they were having to relax their drug policies, and the other CEO was going in exactly the opposite direction in terms of trying to increase the scrutiny and test for even more. As you know, Mr. Chairman, in our state, our governor has really made this a priority in the state budget, and it's something that we are really trying to wrap our arms around, because it is a statewide issue that's certainly hurting our state's economy, but also hurting families. We also know with our work at the college is that it really is a multiplying effect in that if one family member is affected, it really does affect the entire family, and that infrastructure is something that we really do pay attention to.
Thank you. Mr. McLemore, the comment in your testimony that the factory room floor or the version of the factory room floor is outdated. And I think of when my dad worked in a factory, and that image in my mind versus when I received my first tour of Honda of America, quite different. How do we, or how do you, as someone in that industry, begin to try to tell kids who, from a very young age, you got to get a 4-year degree, you got to get a 4-year degree, you got to get a 4-year degree. I'm thinking of a constituent I spoke to yesterday, a mom whose daughter graduated from an Ohio college, a private college in Ohio, 4 years, well into the 6 figures, and she got a job as a public school teacher. Good job. She wants to do it, but the cost versus the employment, very different. Yet you have jobs that don't require a 4-year degree. There are other factory jobs that are much different. How do you begin, or how do we begin to help educate America's youth that there are good jobs that you don't need to get a 4-year degree?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a great question, and I think the big challenge for employers and manufacturers, the answer to that question, I think, really is in the model that we've created with Columbus State. So what you may find, I believe in the written testimony that I wasn't able to describe, is our ability to create a line of sight for parents and students in middle school, starting with our game, manufacturing game, that gives them a glimpse of and some experience of what it's like to be in a modern manufacturing environment. So this is a start, which we think is very innovative. But I think in addition to that, in our partnership with Columbus State, we go together, as an example, to a suburban high school near Columbus and in the Columbus School District, and talk to parents and students directly about the career, about the pathway, but also we talk about the opportunity to continue that education through tuition reimbursement and partnerships that Columbus State may have with the Ohio State University, Miami, and other 4-year institutions in the state of Ohio. Once students, and specifically parents, and many times the mothers of those children, understand those opportunities, it's like a light bulb going off because they have no understanding that these careers are available just down the street. If I could add, what's quite interesting, the work-study students that we have at Columbus State that we've made full-time offers to, 7 of the 8 of those students did not know Honda had those manufacturing careers before they started at Columbus State in that program. So our challenge is selling manufacturing. So we've partnered with Ohio Manufacturers Association, Jobs Ohio, and the Office of Workforce Transformation to create a marketing strategy for the state of Ohio for all manufacturers, developing a toolkit and allowing them to go into schools and sell manufacturing. It's about changing the conversation.
That's pretty exciting. I'm going to yield to our ranking member.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Stevenson, we've heard a lot about the critical role that skills play in workforce development, but it's certainly not the only challenge facing workers today. You touched on it a little bit in your testimony, but what are some of the other major challenges that we need to be thinking about to make sure that those workers can actually have access to that skills training, that education, and get on the path to higher productivity jobs?
Thank you for that question. And I do think that you mentioned in your opening statement the need for an all of the above strategy. We see that there's big gaps between children's start in life, and some of that starts with early access to preschool. It's very hard for kids to catch up when they have these very big gaps from the beginning. And it turns out that supporting early childhood education doesn't just support the children, but it allows the parents to stay attached to the labor force. What we see is that the more people stay attached to the labor force and have continuous employment, the better they are able to build a career path and get those increases in wages. Gaps out of the labor force are bad for people's wage growth. And there are lots of things that lead to gaps. Not having adequate paid family leave leads to gaps. And we've seen evidence of that across other countries. We've seen it in the United States when we've had states like California pass paid family leave programs. You see more continuous employment, particularly of young moms. And as I mentioned in my testimony, I think some of the very compelling research coming out about young men is that they're cycling in and out of the labor force. They go, they get a job, but they don't last very long. Then they take some time out. Then they run out of money and they go back and get a job. But that doesn't lead to a pathway in which they're building a set of skills that are going to generate jobs. And some of that is due, to the problems with drug use. Some of it's due to criminal justice problems. But there are lots of reasons in which workers don't feel that they have access to an upward mobility.
You end up with a series of jobs, not a career path.
Exactly. And I really want to emphasize how important workers seeing a career path and having a progress narrative is, a progress path where they see that if they continue to diligently work, they're going to get a raise. There's so many workers today who their real wages are no different than they might have been 20 years ago. And that does not create the incentives for workers to adopt the skills that we need in order for them to build greater productivity.
Dr. Harrison, I want to jump to you real quick. One, what do we need to do? And I assume you have some partnerships, or I hope you do with high schools as well, to make sure that they see that early on, that to know what some of those paths are and what some of those opportunities are. And then I also want to touch on the issue of in talking to people who are struggling in the labor force. It seems to me that the worst of all possible worlds, and I've run across this in many cases, are the students who end up with a substantial debt burden from their college experience, but not the degree or the skill sets to actually be able to do something about that debt and the earning power to put that behind them. What should we be doing to make sure that we avoid that scenario with your students or other students across the country?
Thank you, Ranking Member Heinrich. First, with regard to your question on high schools, we are in 140 high schools in 60 districts in our region, and have actually almost 5,000 high school students taking college coursework at any one time. One of the catalytic programs we've had has actually been funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and they're investing in innovation program I3. We're the only community college in the country that was selected that's allowing us to work with 7 districts with a high percentage of low-income students to really model and build in these kinds of career paths like we're doing with Honda. The disconnect with regard to the bachelor's degree holder that's taken on a lot of debt and isn't making enough money to service that debt is something we see all the time. We've got more students at Columbus State with bachelor's degrees and even advanced degrees than we've ever had because they haven't been able to get a high earning job based on the bachelor's degree that they had. You all know the data, I'm sure, as well or better than I do, but the average bachelor's degree holder graduates with $30,000 or more in debt. It takes them over 20 years to pay it back. This is a generational kind of thing. So really helping students and families understand that they do have options is something that we're working hard on. We've got a great complement of universities in Central Ohio, certainly led by Ohio State University, and are really promoting the 2+2 pathway to the bachelor's degree in a very public way, where students earn their freshman and sophomore year at the associate degree at Columbus State and then are guaranteed admission to Ohio State and other university partners, saving tens of thousands of dollars on the bachelor's degree. The other thing that Scott touched on, and I do want to call out really the leadership that Honda has provided, and Scott specifically, in terms of elevating these career pathways, and not just for the benefit of Honda, but for manufacturing generally. But if you do the math for the students in the co-op program that he's talking about, I'll call out one student specifically, Anton, who was in, I think, our first class, a son of Filipino immigrants. Started in our co-op program making $18 an hour while still in high school, graduated with his associate degree at the age of 19, earned a $60,000 a year job at Honda, and now I think is in a bachelor's degree program with full tuition reimbursement paid by Honda. So he's going to graduate with his bachelor's degree in his early 20s, not only debt-free, but he's been making money since he was 18 from Honda. That is replicable, and that's something that we think is scalable.
Great. Thank you very much.
Good question. Representative Swigert, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is one of those, I have a fixation on this particular subject area, so please forgive me if I'm slightly disharmonious, because we all have this habit of speaking our own book, our own life experiences, our own area of specialty, and I fear missing what many of us who are fixated on the actual demographics are seeing. So I'd like to just run through a number of things. Can we actually do one big step backwards away from anecdotals and actually first some discussion on what we see in the labor force participation numbers, particularly some of the demographics and the number of our population, that if it were post-96 welfare reform for that 10 years would have been actually in participation in the labor force, and today are not. And we all screw up your name. Is it Furchtgott-Roth?
Oh, Furchtgott-Roth. You should just say Diane.
They get close.
Yeah.
You were the only one who actually mentioned some of the underlying data. But first off, let's actually just do backwards, something you did mention. 60% of males who are not in the labor force today are on
some kind of disability
or social
benefits.
entitlement program right now.
Yeah, exactly. And the point is that these have been expanded. They were expanded during the Great Recession, and then this expansion has stayed rather than being ratcheted back. So our labor force participation rate right now is 62.8%, and it has been around 66, 67% in the past. And some people say, well, this is because older workers are retiring, the baby boomers retiring. But really, the 55 and over labor force participation rate is rising. It's the 25 to 54 that we're concerned about.
You actually beat me to something we've seen in some of the fascinating data is actually older, actually choosing to stay in the labor force much
Right.
longer.
Yes.
Some of that may be savings and retirement and retirement lifestyle assets. If I wanted to find literature to actually look at the post-96 welfare reform, labor force participation, mobility, velocity, particularly my populations moving from, well, let's call it lower tiers into true middle class, where would you send me?
Well, there's been a lot of very interesting work on mobility. My Scott Winship, who works at the Joint Economic Committee for Senator Lee, has done some of the best work on that. And so I would say you should go to Scott Winship and just find his latest articles. He is right on your staff. He is one of the leading experts in the United States on mobility and inequality and these different kinds of issues. He's written extensively on it.
Thank you. And my fixation to particularly staff and everything else is that looking for a more holistic approach, because my fear is this constant saying, I'm going to do a job training program here, I'm going to do this here, or do this here, doesn't help me when I'm looking at just shy of 100 million of my brothers and sisters in the nation. What percentage of that should probably still be participating? Dr. Harrison, in a number of meetings I've had, now this is actually more for the high-tech community, had a fascinating discussion a couple months ago with, I think it was Oracle, who were saying they're tired of hiring four-year computer science degrees and then spending the next couple of years getting them an Oracle certificate, and whether that be Oracle or SAS. Or, are we in a world where it's time to have a revolution in the accreditation world, where I can do my AA, or I can do my and the accreditation world says I'm going to take a little of this, a little of this, a little of that, and actually start doing things that are actually part of what labor markets demand?
Well, I think that's possible. I think it would have to be employer-driven. I think that's the, at least at the community college level, kind of the barometer that we would use, and the ability for employers to determine.
But in your world as a community college, are you allowed to produce programs and say, this doesn't meet our accreditation standards, but Honda really wants to hire someone who's done these classes? I mean, it's almost more a community college of coder camps, or learning to run CNC equipment or other things.
We are allowed, and in fact, it's becoming more commonplace. Our state just approved a short-term certificate pathway that's going to allow for more of these kinds of things. The computer scientists that Oracle was talking about, they're coming to Columbus State to learn Amazon Web Services, cloud technology, or Apple Swift
Because that's
programming.
part of my holistic approach. Is I think it's a revolution, everything from what we consider to be education anymore, down to the job skills. To we have to actually also start to explore, if you wanted to see why healthcare doesn't have wage inflation, how do we compensate healthcare? Well, it's CMS. We functionally have government control and pricing. I mean, there's a series of these things that we throw out in discussion, but if you drill down into them, we are at fault in the way we've built sort of this regulatory mechanics. So I know I'm way over time, but it's a powerful discussion for our society.
Senator Peters, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think those are interesting points, and I'm going to explore some of those a little bit further if I have time, as far as looking at some new paradigms as to how we provide education, which I think is interesting. But I'm also interested in data, and as we were talking about the openings, the job openings that are available, I'd like to have a better sense of where those job openings are. There's been a discussion about manufacturing. Certainly I hear that as I travel around Michigan. Manufacturers are having similar issues as you're having in Ohio. It's no different in Michigan. But when I've looked at some Bureau of Labor data, it seems that in terms of openings, it's in areas like food services, it's in hospitalities, which are far above the average of openings. Many, many more openings in those jobs tend to be lower wage jobs. Dr. Stevenson, I think you mentioned some of that in your testimony. Where is the data? Where are most of the job openings out there? What sorts of skills, what sort of job classifications? What I saw are healthcare, social assistance, daycare, food services. Is that accurate? Where's the data?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we distinguish between job openings and job growth, because we do have a lot of underlying churn. So there will be a lot of hiring, millions of jobs hired in manufacturing, even if as a sector, manufacturing is declining. So that we do have to think about this, because if manufacturing as a sector is declining, it means it's like a game of musical chairs where they keep pulling out some of the chairs, but we're still going to have a whole bunch of new workers going into that field. And I think that that highlights the need for us to provide training that's adaptable and movable and is general enough that students, or graduates, workers are able to move to other sectors if they find themselves short of one of those seats when they're working in a declining sector. The sectors that are growing are in the service sector. In general, the goods producing sector is in decline, and manufacturing is part of that. And this is a longer run trend. And where we're seeing growth is education and health services and business and professional services. And that is some of the reason why you see these strong returns to college education. But it's also just a shift in a global society where we think about where is the U.S. really strong, and we're really strong in services. We export a lot of business and professional services. And I think we'll continue to see job growth in those areas, even though we're going to continue to see hiring in sectors that are not growing as quickly.
The other area that I find interesting, and we heard some comments earlier about employers having to do some training, and certainly Mr. McLemore, you've talked about that as well, is that when I came out of college, I did go through a very extensive training program that the company provided for me. And yet we have seen what I think is a troubling trend, that more and more employer-paid training is going down. It used to be, I think in '96, about 1 in 5 companies, 1 in 5 employees that came in had some sort of employer training. Now that number is extremely low, and employers are just expecting folks to be trained when they walk in the door instead of investing in their employees. That's not what it was like when I came out of college. Is that an accurate reflection? Are those numbers indeed accurate? You're shaking your head, Dr. Stevenson.
Yes, that is accurate, and frankly, it's quite puzzling, because we see workers, we've seen a decline in mobility, so workers are spending more time with their employers, and yet their employers are investing less in them, and I don't have a good explanation for why that is, but it is certainly what we're seeing.
So you're seeing less employer investment in employees, and you're seeing wages that are not going up even though there are shortages. That doesn't seem to comport with classical economics, does it?
It does not.
Anybody else have a comment on that? Why is there a disconnect? There's shortages of skills, employers are not investing in skills, and they're not paying more to attract folks to come into their businesses. Any other ideas? Dr. Harrison?
Well, the only thing I would add to that is we work with a lot of small businesses who don't necessarily have the means to train their employees in the way that you're talking about, or employees are true multitaskers. So what we're working on with our Chamber of Commerce and others is to figure out ways to pool that so that becomes a more collective approach, so that the employer is benefiting, but we're also able to really build the skill set of our region.
Let me, in the remaining time, because it's getting low here. I mean, one area that does train folks are labor unions, particularly in the building trades, that have very extensive apprenticeship programs. I've toured many of them in Michigan. Complete training, students can come in, get basically free training, and get a great job afterwards. And yet we've seen a declining number of union jobs. Is that related to, Dr. Stevenson, you're shaking your head again as well? I mean, what's with declining labor and apprenticeship programs, to me that's a significant problem.
That is a significant problem. With declining unionization, declining union investment and training, somebody has to pick up the slack. And that's either going to be businesses, and they haven't been doing that, or it's going to be government.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rooney, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I don't have a clock, so let me know if I... I'd like to ask Mrs. Furchtgott-Roth a question. since you referenced the labor force participation rate. And I've been mulling over this study from Nick Eberstadt over at AEI, which is pretty chilling, and I'd like to introduce it to the record, if I might. But he starts out by saying, by the criteria of adult work rates, employment conditions in America remain remarkably bleak. And he goes on to cite all kinds of horrendous things. But a couple of them have stood out in the nature of the argument that, or the comment that 3 25 to 55-year-old males for each 25 to 55-year-old unemployed male are sitting out of the workforce and working and living off of benefits. That's 5 million people since 2000. And half of these sitting out of the workplace, some 7 million, take daily pain meds. Half are on Medicaid. And there's also some statistics from Alan Kruger at the Council of Economic Advisors, after you were there, about that a majority of these people were surveyed that they, quote, don't do civil society, unquote. So I'm not an expert in this, and you are, and I'd like to ask you, what do you see we can do to kind of draw these people out and into the workforce using some of the tools that you describe in your testimony?
Well, it used to be that if you were an able-bodied adult, you couldn't get benefits. You had to work. You couldn't get health insurance. You had to work for that. And this has changed in the United States over the past 10 years. And the results are what we have seen as Nick Eberstadt has described. So there have been other people who've written on this. Casey Mulligan at the University of Chicago in his book, The Redistribution Recession, and also his book on the effects of the Affordable Care Act on labor force participation. So it's clear that if you get benefits without having to work, then fewer people are going to work. It's not something that an economist needs to do a study to analyze. Anyone can understand it, although many economists have measured this, this phenomenon. As well as the services, there's also a lot more job openings than hires in information, financial activities, finance and insurance, real estate rental. So there are opportunities out there. I would say that employers don't necessarily do formal training, but they do a lot of on-the-job training. So when someone comes, they show them the ropes. And many employers are saying that they cannot find people who come and who want to do these jobs. There was an experiment of sorts in North Carolina when Governor McCrory in 2010 said, we can't find enough welders. He cut back on insurance benefits dramatically to 16 weeks from about 55 weeks. And all of a sudden, a lot of jobs started getting created in North Carolina. Employment went up, unemployment went down.
Thank you. Can I ask another one, or might I have to? Yes, got some time. Right there. Oh, okay, good. Oh, wow, I didn't see that. Okay, Dr. Stevenson, maybe for you, but also it would be great for you too, is in the concept of the workforce participation and the testimony you put about there that business can and do more. There's been a lot reading. I just read this book, Poor No More, about the argument that instead of workforce training and preamble activities to work, you just get someone in there and put them to work. And between OJT and apprenticeship and things like that, they'll gradually get with the program and then maybe supplant it later with some training to advance their skills. Can you comment on that, or is that?
Are you asking if I think it's a good idea to put people into jobs before they're prepared so that they can learn on the job? You know, I think people have different ways of learning. There's obviously an importance of having a certain basic skill, and you know, I advise my students that to the extent they can, they should concentrate on building their skills because they'll be more productive once the skills are built. You know, I'd like to emphasize that, you know, a century ago, countries mocked the United States for how much we were sending people to high school. They said that was a waste and we should put people into jobs and they should learn on the job. And what we did was set ourselves up for the most impressive growth in the world last century because we were willing to educate people. And I think we should be thinking about education today in the same way that we thought about it when we were expanding high school to the masses. We need to make sure that people have the opportunities to develop skills so that they can productively contribute. Lots of people learn really good by doing, and so learn really well by doing. I think that you know, it's a great idea to build out those opportunities, but you know, I wouldn't say that we should just have students or young people, dumping them into jobs without giving them adequate training.
On the other hand, the skills that you get when you graduate from high school now are not necessarily the skills that people had 50 years ago. If you look at the tests that people passed 50 or 60 years ago compared with the tests they pass now, there are some parts of the country where the graduation rate is only 55%, and we need to do more to let those students have alternatives, such as charter schools or school choice, allow the tax money to follow the child so their parents have the ability to choose a better school for them. And so they do get those skills, because with the math skills and the reading skills, you can start in a lot of employers with a lot of jobs and work your way up. But without those basic math and reading and writing skills, it's difficult.
Thank you. Good discussion. Senator Hassan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Heinrich, for this hearing, and to the panel. Thank you all for being here this morning. I know you've all been talking about the relatively low national unemployment rate, and it is clear that there is no easy solution to addressing a record high number of unfilled jobs, reported from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics as 5.7 million openings in May. We all can agree we need more participation in the labor market and a more skilled workforce in order to be successful in changing our economy. As governor of New Hampshire and now as senator, it's the #1 thing I hear about from business people and employers. One way to do this is to identify the individuals who have fallen out of the labor workforce that Congressman Rooney was just pointing to, and to assist them with additional supports so that they can gain the skills necessary to fill vital job openings. Because again, I hear from employers that the people who do show up often don't have the high-tech skills that we need. In New Hampshire, programs like Families in Transition and Goodwill have had success looking at the whole person and providing wraparound services to help people navigate homelessness, addressing their transportation needs, and securing child care in addition to job training. These programs in New Hampshire have demonstrated that at-risk individuals, when given the right supports, are capable of finding stable, good-paying employment and working their way into the middle class. So do you agree that these types of programs assist in expanding our labor markets? And do any of you have suggestions on how to scale and implement these types of services nationwide? And Dr. Stevenson, I'd love to start with you.
Yes, so I strongly believe that these types of family support programs are essential to increasing the labor force. And to put some data on it, research has shown that female labor force participation in the United States would be 6 percentage points higher if we had the kind of access to child care and paid family leave that other countries have. So we know that our lack of this type of support is actually holding back female labor force participation. We also know that the lack of support leads to long-term negative consequences as well. We're also learning more about people's cognitive limitations. And so that sounds almost like a difficult thing to talk about, but if you spend your time trying to figure out how you're going to put food on the table, you've got less left to give your employer. And so by making sure that we remove some of the burdens that people have, struggling to figure out how are they going to get their kids cared for while they're at work, what are they going to do when their kid's throwing up at school, when we reduce some of those cognitive burdens, they have more to give their employer, and that leads to higher productivity and better outcomes. And we know what needs to be done for that. We know that we need more government support for paid family leave and for childcare.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists like to address that?
Well, we already have a substantial deficit, and these government programs would come at an additional cost. So one has to figure out what is worthwhile. And there are plenty of...
And just to, I also saw Dr. Harrison wanted to comment, so I want to make sure we get to him as well. But just to that point, in New Hampshire, because of our low unemployment rate, we actually had significant reserves in our welfare fund. We could use those reserves for some of these supports and wraparound services. And then we see things like people who get benefits from expanded Medicaid going into the workforce because they weren't healthy enough with chronic illness and kind of revolving door into the emergency room to work. Now they are. So there's some good evidence that it could actually address some of our deficit issues as well.
Right, exactly. But if we look at Europe that has government-paid maternity care, frequently government-paid child care, In many cases, their labor force participation rates are no higher than ours, plus their economic growth is much lower than ours in general, because these benefits kind of weigh down on their sectors.
Well, and I don't think anybody's suggesting exactly the same thing. Dr. Harrison?
Well, I was just going to say these issues really are all related, and we see the same thing happening at the college. As I said in my testimony, most college students are working. Many of them have family responsibilities, so the same kinds of challenges that exist in the workplace exist in terms of helping them advance their education. We need to remember that the education employment pipeline really isn't sequential anymore. It's happening concurrently. And it's left to the student in many cases to balance their job schedule, their family responsibilities, and their academic workload. And that's something that we work with every day and try to help them manage it.
Thank you. Mr. McLemore, anything to add?
No, Senator, I think it's been covered quite well by my fellow panelists.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. LaHood is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, for your valuable testimony, and for this subject matter. The district I represent in central and west central Illinois is a fairly rural district, but a common complaint that I hear from employers, and I have some larger employers, Caterpillar is based there, State Farm Insurance, John Deere, ADM, that there are lots of jobs available, but no one can pass a drug test. Or a criminal background check. And I hear that constantly. And I know some states have been creative in what they've done to help in this area, but I wanted to ask Dr. Harrison or maybe Mr. McLemore, in your experience, have you seen where states have been creative or how they've helped to address this problem, and any thoughts you can shed on that?
I don't have a silver bullet solution to that. I mean, I think it's something in Ohio we're certainly struggling with. And the one thing I would say is we're trying to do it collectively in our state and address both the individual that's involved, but also look at how we can prevent that down the road. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to do it through education and awareness and those kinds of things, but it's an issue certainly in Ohio we're struggling with.
Mr. McLemore?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Harrison. It's a collaborative approach. I don't have specifics around how we would address it, other than I did mention earlier, I guess Honda does support and participate in soft skills training at the high school level. And one of the things that I believe we could do is include that in our soft skills training with youth and talk about the negative impact of that on their lives, and as well as their career, specifically in manufacturing or in any career that they pursue. But we haven't implemented any specific models other than involving soft skills training for youth.
We have had success in the past with massive re-education campaigns. There are kids who will take drugs, but they won't throw trash on the ground. They've been brainwashed not to litter. They've been brainwashed not to smoke cigarettes. The rate of smoking is dramatically decreased. Littering and recycling. We've brainwashed them to know that you should throw your bottle in the right trash can. We need to have a similar effort with these opioids and with these drugs. We're not putting enough effort into it. We need to be starting, grade school, massive campaigns like we have. And I'm sure that if we've done it with if we've seen results with these other things, we can also see results with drugs.
And is it your thought that the statistics that show how many jobs are available, that would change if this was implemented the right way?
I also think that we need to be carefully looking at the replacement ratios, how much people gain when they're not working, and dial that back. They are now eligible for all kinds of programs that they didn't used to be eligible for 10 or 15 years ago. It didn't used to be that able-bodied adults were able to collect benefits. They had to work. Now they can collect benefits, so we're also seeing the results of these.
Thank you. Another area that I wanted to cover is what I call kind of the brain drain from rural areas to urban areas. There seems to be a gravitation towards more of our cities and urban areas, and young people that don't necessarily want to come back to rural areas or smaller sized cities and go to larger cities. Can you, Dr. Harrison or Mr. McLemore, comment on that?
Yeah, Congressman, that's it is a challenge for Honda. Most of our manufacturing facilities are located in rural areas. In terms of finding talent, we're working very hard with the initiatives that we've put in place with local community, technical career centers, high schools, to encourage young people to pursue these manufacturing opportunities. We've recently partnered with the Society of Manufacturing Engineers and are funding a manufacturing pathway at our Anna High School near our engine plant. In addition to that, we have mobile manufacturing labs, one of which I think Dr. Harrison is aware of, where we're offering training, both incumbent training as well as training in those regional and those rural areas. So we're for Honda, it's an important challenge, and an important it's important that we find solutions for that.
We've seen both sides of that, where we do see exactly as you're describing, people moving from rural areas to urban areas like Columbus. But I was in conversations just recently with employers and some of our economic development leaders, looking at a heat map of where the jobs are and where the people are. And a lot of the jobs are clustered in the urban areas, and they can't get people to relocate from some of the rural areas of our state. So the jobs aren't always where the people are, and that's something that we continue to try to align.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I recognize Ms. Maloney, the Senator and I were wondering if we could go one more round, the folks that are here, of questions, because we think this has been a very, very good. Is that okay with the four of you? Thank you. Senator Maloney. Representative Maloney, I almost demoted you.
Thank you. Labor force participation for women peaked in the 1990s and has since declined. And according to a Brookings Institute study, 28% of that decline can be attributed to the lack of family-friendly work policies. And how would a federal paid family leave policy affect vacancies in the labor force and the speed with which they would be filled?
Well, I think first of all, there are different ways to have family leave policies, but I think any mandatory family leave policy would result in a decline in hiring of women of childbearing age, because women of childbearing age would come with a certain cost to them. So if an employer had to choose a qualified man and a qualified woman, the qualified woman would lose out. So I would say that paid family leave policies are not a good idea to promote labor force participation.
And your comment, Ms. Stevenson?
So I would disagree with that respectfully. I do think that paid family leave policies promote greater attachment of women to the labor force, and that greater attachment leads to greater wage growth, which encourages overall participation. I have recently been part of a bipartisan commission with AEI and Brookings to put together a paid family leave proposal. And we did tackle this issue of wanting to ensure that there was as little discrimination as possible, or employers attempting to opt out. And so we do recommend that paid family leave be available to both men and women. And that's not just for the issue of discrimination, but because that's actually what people want. Surveys show very clearly that young men today want to be able to take time to take care of their kids. They want to be fully engaged parents, and that means they need to be able to take a day off when their kid is sick, or they want to be able to take time off when they have a newborn child enter the home. And so what we see is that when we have paid family leave policies, if we had a nationwide paid family leave policy, I believe that women would have greater labor force participation. They would find it easier to stay attached to the labor market. I do also want to add that while we have seen labor force participation of women peak in the 1990s, we have seen their contributions continue to grow in other ways. And so that illustrates that it's not just about paid family leave isn't just about trying to get women to participate more in the labor force, but making sure we're taking advantage of our most skilled workers. Women are increasingly the most college-educated workers. They have increasingly have the same level of job experience as their male colleagues. And these high-skilled, highly experienced workers find themselves in a bind when they have young children and are unable to access paid leave policies. And so overall, I think the economy would benefit from something that neutralized the issue of paid leave so that employers weren't wrestling with whether that was a benefit they wanted to offer, but something that everybody had equal access to.
Well, President Trump has shown support with his daughter for paid leave for the birth of a child, and research from the United Nations shows that America is among 2 countries in the whole world that does not have a policy for paid leave for the birth of a child. We are in the same company with Papua New Guinea. So this seems to have more support. A bill passed the House of Representatives twice, did not pass the Senate. What are your comments on paid leave for the birth of a child?
I think the good thing about coming last is we have lots and lots of evidence that it works around the rest of the world. And I have confidence that the United States is a strong economy that can succeed and do even better when we move to the types of policies that every other country besides Papua New Guinea has.
And Ms. Roth?
Many employers have their own paid family leave policies. And this is something that should be worked out between the employer and employees on a case-by-case basis. There are some companies in the Washington area that provide 5 months of paid maternity leave for a birth of a child. And there are others that don't provide any, but it basically raises the costs of employment. We've already been decrying the lack of job opportunities. Any mandated costs on employers increase the move to technology, the substitution of technology for workers, and would result in lower employment rather than higher employment.
Mr. Harrison, in your written testimony, you were talking about career education and hooking up businesses with schools and training young people. I have a very successful program near my district, right on the border between IBM and a high school, where literally every child is trained for a job in IBM. They have partnered with them. They then help them achieve a college education, and then they move them directly into their jobs. And it's fantastic. Every child in that school gets a job when they graduate. And do you see this moving forward with businesses, partnering with public education to train for the specific jobs they need? You keep reading that certain industries can't find the workers they need. Why in the world aren't they partnering and working with our schools to train them with exactly the skill sets that they need?
But before you answer, I just want to remind the gentle lady that her time has expired, but go ahead and answer her
Thank you
question.
so much, Mr. Chairman, but this is an important question. When you see something succeeding, you want to try to figure out how you can make it happen again.
I'll be brief. I believe that's the PTEC program.
Yes, that's
IBM
it.
runs,
That's exactly in Brooklyn.
And in Central Ohio, we have a version of that replicated in many industries. You weren't here earlier, but our partnership with Honda of America is a great example of that. We have many other companies, American Electric Power, JP Morgan Chase, others, who are working to do the same kind of thing. It's not as specific yet as what IBM is doing, except with regard to what we're doing in manufacturing. But there is really kind of a groundswell of work in information technology because a lot of the larger companies in Central Ohio share that as an acute need. So it's something we're working collaboratively on with K-12, community college, and our university partners.
Thank you. My time's expired. Thank
Mr. Byer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and thank you all very much for being here. And Ms. Furchtgott-Roth, I'd like to immediately push back as a business owner. I have 380 employees, $200 million a year, and we instituted paid maternity leave 6 weeks about 4 years ago, and we have had no tendency to try to replace these people with technology. In fact, it's been an extraordinary recruiting tool for us to bring people in. We find that it's so hard to attract women to a business where women are very successful, that this can be a positive thing rather than a negative thing. I don't see, in fact, there's lots of studies that show, especially within the federal government, the legislation that Ms. Maloney has offered again and again, that it actually saves the federal government money to do maternity leave rather than cost. You don't have to train new people, you don't have to hire new people. And the like.
Precisely, and as you know, employers are very smart. They can work this out on their own. The company that I mentioned that offers 5 months paid maternity leave also has trouble attracting women, and this is a recruitment tool. I'm just saying that the federal government does not have to do a mandate. This is being increasingly worked out on an employer-by-employer basis as there is increasing shortage of women and companies want to recruit them.
But it may well be part of the fundamental problem about why we have this so-called skills gap. You know, when I talk to people in the business community, as I do all the time, you hear this, we just can't find the qualified people again and again. But this issue has been around a long, long time, not just since the Great Recession. And there's lots of research out there. In fact, I've got a passel full of articles here. But people from like Boston Consulting Group, Andrew Weaver, Paul Otterman, they showed that really there's a little evidence of a meaningful and persistent skills gap, but there are many other things part of it, including wage stagnation, and including the great piece that one of the greatest obstacles may be employers' insistence on prior work experience in the same industry to bring them in. So Mr. McLemore, as a car dealer, and I love a Honda franchise, by the way, you know, we are very familiar of how closely we've worked together with our manufacturer to provide training. What's your perspective on this skills gap and the search for skilled employees?
Well, thank you for that question. I think, as you mentioned, there are many reasons why we have this challenge. And I think what I found in our partnership with Columbus State and the partnership with our other educational institutions is it's really around the understanding that these opportunities exist, and then what are the pathways in which they can be skilled and trained to be prepared for the a bachelor's degree or even an associate degree. A technical certificate can get you started. And with the right employer, you may not have to even leave.
I liked your example of the Air Force veteran in part because I think that line of sight needs to go in both directions. So people need to know what's possible in places where those jobs may not be there today, but they could be. And then employers also need to understand the inherent advantages that you may acquire with a workforce in a rural area that has an incredible loyalty to the business itself and an investment in community that you might not find in other places.
Look like you had a thought there.
No, I'm just realizing I misunderstood Congressman Rooney's question, I think. So our challenge is really as the demographics, as it was stated, where we're losing people in rural areas population-wise to urban areas. For Honda, we're focusing on our 15-county radius. So like I mentioned before, our facilities are located in rural communities. Our focus is there. However, it includes Franklin County and other urban areas in which actually I live. So I'm familiar with the challenges of getting people that live in urban areas out to Marysville, Ohio. Even though I've been doing it for 30 years and think it's great, it's an awareness of those opportunities out there. But we're continuing to focus on our local communities, whether they be rural or whether they be urban.
Senator Hassan?
Thank you, and this has really been a great discussion, and I greatly appreciate it. You know, one of the things that some businesses in New Hampshire have been doing to this whole issue of line of sight is not only working to help young people understand the career pathway, and we have a whole career pathway initiative in our public school systems with our community college systems right now, but we also see companies bringing in guidance counselors and parents because, especially around advanced manufacturing, because so many parents think that manufacturing is something that will injure your child in a dirty environment instead of the high-tech effort that it now is. But I also just wanted to touch on a couple of the efforts that the federal government has invested in to help with the kind of partnerships that Dr. Harrison and Mr. McLemore, you've been talking about so well this morning. One of them came with the passage of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act in 2014, which was integral in helping states expand sector partnerships to ensure workforce training is coordinated and responsive truly to the employer's need. And they're led by industry and a makeup of different stakeholder groups. It's a sector partnership model. And are you familiar with it? Do you think it's something that if we expanded, it would be helpful in developing the kind of workforce we need?
In Central Ohio, we really do focus on a sector strategy approach, and a lot of that is a cascade from our statewide economic development plan.
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, we see it working really well. We also see real advantages, and Scott talks a lot about this in our local groups, of having cross-sector conversations as well, because as I said before, the model that Honda's put in place with their co-op program, we've got companies from other industries that are trying to replicate, so I think both are important.
Yeah, because the other program that's been very important in New Hampshire is our TACT grant program, and I think you referenced a similar program. Our Great Bay Community College started an advanced technology and academic center largely through the use of a TACT grant that brought in an additional $4 million in state funds, and then participation and partnerships of companies all across the region. So we now have more than 100 partners in industry as well as state and federal agencies. And the center is helping to create a program that gives students advanced manufacturing skills. And again, it seems to me that you're both saying it's strategically done with good partnerships so that the educators understand the needs of the actual industry and a variety of industries. They can really make a difference. Is that a fair assessment?
Those kinds of federal investments can truly be catalytic. We were involved in a TACT grant in logistics that included colleges from 8 states. And the ability to really bring those kinds of things to scale, and the federal investment gets people to the table and really brings employers, K-12, and the community college in kind of rowing in the same direction and really trying to move the needle forward.
The last question I have about this issue is just strikes me because it's something that one of our major employers, large hospital in the seacoast of New Hampshire, took on. But it's understanding that as we work with a labor pool that may have had low participation rates or lack of education or training, often these folks are working at fairly, at entry-level jobs, and the training programs that have traditionally been offered even through community colleges have been, 6 months, a year, 2 years. What this healthcare organization decided to do was help train people up in what's normally a 2-year curriculum in kind of a series of boot camps over weekends, so that you're still giving people the opportunity, to that Air Force vets example, of working and supporting their families, but often for single parents in particular, the notion that they could just give up their work for 6 months or a year to get highly trained is just not reasonable. So are you seeing kind of different ways of developing the curriculum and the schedule for students so that they can do both of these things?
In more and more of our programs, our curriculum design is based on stackable certificates, so that students are able to earn a workforce-based credential with market value before earning the associate degree. But what they've earned there counts fully towards their ultimate earning of the associate degree, because most students are working while they're going to school. I do want to follow up, if I may, on the federal investment idea. And Mr. Chairman, you'll be very familiar with this. The city of Columbus competed against 77 other cities last year with the U.S. Department of Transportation grant called the Smart Cities Challenge. A similar kind of program on this workforce area could truly be catalytic. And if you look at how that has brought the community together, it was a $40 million investment from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Central Ohio has now put in over $500 million in private and local funding to really make that a benchmark that we think will move the needle, not just for Central Ohio, but for our nation. The same kind of model could work in this workforce misalignment area when you're getting the right people at the table. And again, federal funding can really help move that along.
Well, thank you, and
so
thank you,
let
Mr.
me,
Chair.
perfect segue. Final question, Dr. Harrison, because you mentioned this in your testimony. Anecdotally, I've heard in my district, a person in a rural area who has a job in Columbus, downtown, but has a beat-up car breaks down, now they can't get to work, no bus line. Opposite too, you have a person who lives in the urban part of Columbus, job is in Dublin, suburb, or Amazon on the east side, no bus line. How does that smart cities challenge in your mind fix that, or does it?
Well, we're hoping it does, because first of all, our public transportation CODA is a key part of that, and it wasn't necessarily part of Smart Cities, but it was part of another Department of Transportation grant where we've got a rapid transit line that now comes down Cleveland Avenue, where the buses signal the traffic signals so that there are fewer lights that they have to stop at, and the hub of that is right in front of our bookstore at the college, which is kind of the entry to the city. So what that will do, we hope, is promote more public transportation, because now instead of sitting on a bus for 45 minutes or an hour one way when you've got children or a job you've got to get to, it makes it much more efficient. We also think that the smart cities work specifically should be able to contribute to a much more robust ride-sharing operation. If you look at the traffic that comes into our campus every day, it is full of cars with only a driver. And they're following each other down 670 or 71 or Cleveland Avenue. And the ability to really create a smarter infrastructure around those connections, I think, would be important. If you layer on then an electric or autonomous vehicle that's part of that, it really can change the dynamics of the region.
Wow, this has been fascinating. I hope you four have thought so as well. I think the committee here has gotten a lot out of this. So appreciate your time today. Thank you for making yourself available. We like to remind the witnesses that the record will be open for 5 business days for any member that would like to submit questions for the record. Thank you all so much. This hearing is adjourned.